Yeah, I really like the look of this Hana character. Cute design, cool sounding ability, and I already really like Megami. It's nice to see him with someone interested in him. I can't wait to see what direction Gege chooses to take her in. Ah! I'm a big Jujutsu Kaisen fan, and there's plenty of things in the series that I've come to enjoy over its run. The power system, the characters, the world. Akutami Gege is certainly talented, and their first big break has been a worldwide success. As of this point in time, Jujutsu Kaisen has recently ended, and for what feels like maybe the first time, the majority of the discussion has finally turned away from the theories. Oh my god, so many ways Gojo could have come back. Rather than talk about what could happen in the narrative, we've been left to talk about what did happen. And believe me, I have thoughts. Too many thoughts, in fact, to fit into one video. However, my solution has been this. One video, at least right now, one event from the manga to illustrate one big problem that I think Gege's writing style is guilty of. That problem? I think that Jujutsu Kaisen entirely prioritizes its big moments at the expense of the smaller stuff. The groundwork, the characters, and ultimately the narrative. Now, you may be thinking, Tim, man, it's a shonen. Of course it's gonna have big moments. And you'd be right, big moments are important for shonen, especially for a manga under the flagship of Jump. The issue is, Jujutsu Kaisen is significantly shorter than a lot of other big comparable shonen. It's not a Dragon Ball Z, it's not a Naruto, it's only about 270 chapters. If it just has big moments, it sacrifices quite a lot. And to be honest, Akutami Gege's just constantly been doing so much. The way that Gege has written JJK has been to leap from big moment to the next without any downtime. Naturally, I still see a lot of people debating this sort of topic, especially post JJK ending, and there are a lot of people who will come up with this, well, that's never what JJK was, or it didn't need these things. But really, that's just their opinion, and that's fine. But JJK's best parts are filled with promise, progress, and payoff. In fact, these concepts are something that a lot of writing honestly lives by. But repeatedly, Jujutsu Kaisen skips the progress part. We get promise and we get payoff, and these become memorable moments. But the threads between them become weaker for the lack of progress. If you go through Jujutsu Kaisen on a reread, it becomes apparent that whilst the manga works really well on a weekly release cycle, it doesn't work as well for a complete narrative. But enough of that right now. I have a different example on hand, and it's actually related to one of my favourite decisions that Gege made for JJK. You read the title, you've probably guessed it. It's Sukuna's possession of Megami. In one of the biggest twists of the series, Sukuna exploited his binding vow with Yuji to force his own soul to incarnate into Megami's body, effectively body hopping between the two main characters. There's a lot that Gege gets right with this development. Firstly, it's flat out interesting and exciting. We spent a lot of time with these characters, and Sukuna's repeated torment of Yuji creates a sense of anticipation. There's been this big plan to steal away Megami. What's Sukuna gonna do next? Additionally, I've got to give a hand to the thematic brilliance of it. We won't go too far into it right now, but it should be clear that one of JJK's main themes is the connection between life and death. How should you die? How should you choose to live? And who do you save? These are concepts tied especially close to Yuji and Megami. When Sukuna possesses Megami, it serves to amplify this further. The Enchain Binding Vow, which functions as the catalyst for this possession, was made by Yuji in order to preserve his life, after giving it up for Megami, and was the culmination of Yuji's struggle as he contemplated the quote-unquote correct way to die after the passing of his grandfather. How about another idea within this theme? If you save someone else's life, what if they go on to destroy another's life? This is played with a couple of times by Gege. In chapter 63, Megami and Yuji have similar conversations with Nobara and Sukuna respectively on the subject of the consequences of their actions in relation to living and dying. That was a long sentence, stay with me here. As a result of their combined action in Yuji's swallowing of Sukuna's finger and Megami's advocation to Gojo for Yuji's survival, Sukuna's fingers have begun to resonate. they'll indirectly be causing deaths by their impact on cursed spirits. Even if things such as the Yasuhachi Bridge incident would take place eventually anyway, this is a heavy burden to bear. They each reach the same conclusion: don't tell the other guy. Post Shibuya, in chapter 143, this issue is pulled up again. Yuji feels responsible for the deaths Sukuna has caused. Megumi simply claims that it is their combined fault, that Yuji is not alone, that they must save the people they want to save, and in doing so, Megumi asks Yuji to start by saving himself, by saving Megumi. In both events, they face the future, and they decide to carry on living, supporting each other. This of course makes it all the more brilliant when Gege throws a spanner in the works by forcing them apart. Sukuna's use of the binding vow means that Yuji has indirectly spelt out tragedy for his own saviour. Now, Megumi is the one subjected to the curse of housing Sukuna. And even worse, Sukuna has control of the body. Alongside Sukuna's blatant interest in Megumi, this is a great example of Gege setting up and fulfilling well on a couple of JJK's key threads. Thematically sound, this twist makes a great example of one of the aforementioned big moments. So what issue could I take with this? Well, this is where we start to dig a bit deeper. I've seen plenty of people point to these scenarios and claim Gege is a master writer because of it, and that people who don't like his writing simply don't understand. Weird pseudo-intellectualism aside, thematics and big ideas are just one part of writing. The execution of those themes and ideals is an entirely different side, and these are the places where problems arise in Gege's style. With Sukuna's possession of Megumi, the problems fit into one of two categories. The first would be the circumstances surrounding the possession, as a number of overtly convenient things take place to facilitate Gege having Sukuna take this action. Basically, a ton of stuff happens that probably shouldn't happen, and it's all just to make this big moment work. The second would be the actual narrative consequences of this decision, rather than any of the potential ones. I say this because very frequently I feel that people praise Gege for what his decisions could be, rather than what they actually are. Don't worry if this all sounds a bit abstract, we're going to clarify now in this next part. Although the thematic setup to the possession of Megumi is great, the narrative setup leaves a bit to be desired. In short, it's a mix of potential gaps in logic, underexplained concepts, and relatively contrived circumstances. The big one for me is the Enchain Vow itself. Despite being the main factor for this rather epic turn in Jujutsu Kaisen's narrative, I think the Enchain Vow was handled relatively sloppily. Don't get me wrong, the planning aspect of it is very cool, in which Sukuna has effectively had a bullet loaded in the chamber since chapter 11, and now, 200 chapters later, he's decided to take a shot. However, this is one of the many times in which I think Gege bends the rules for Sukuna in order to achieve this big impactful moment. I say this because I'd argue that Sukuna broke the binding vow, the same binding vow that allowed him to do it in the first place. See, the conditions for the Enchain Vow are pretty clear. Sukuna gets control of Yuji's body for 1 minute, but he also vows not to harm or kill anyone for a minute. There are 3 actions that Sukuna takes that could, or should, be considered as harming someone. The first is that he outright knocks Hana unconscious. The second is that he tears off Yuji's finger. The third is that he holds Megumi's jaw open to force feed him the finger. There's a defense frequently poised for this, and it's generally about semantics in the vow. Sukuna makes what he claims is a gamble. He rips off Yuji's finger and attributes being able to hurt Yuji as a result of Yuji not considering himself as a part of the term anyone. This is obviously extremely convenient, I see you Gege, but I can let this work since it is very in line with Yuji's character. However, I refuse to believe that these other 2 actions are somehow not harming someone. Sukuna knocks out a teenage girl, then forces a teenage boy to consume something that has been explicitly related to a lethal poison. And I'm supposed to think there's no harm? Frankly, the semantics thing is a bit stupid. There's not really any other binding vow in the series that relies on this type of manipulation of semantics to create loopholes. It's simple. Gege broke their own rules in order to build a cool moment, which is understandable, but equally weak writing. Additionally, it begins this downhill slide in which Sukuna consistently gets to do whatever the plot needs him to, when it needs him to. Yes, Sukuna is very cool, and I know a lot of you really like him, but if this were anything else, we'd criticize it. I don't think Sukuna gets a pass. Another bit of flawed logic in Sukuna's action is down to the nature of the finger. Early into Jujutsu Kaisen, Gege has Megumi explicitly state that there's a 1 in a million chance of the cursed object incarnating into the body. Yet, when Sukuna shoves one of his nasty digits down Megumi's throat, he manages just fine. Now my maths might be wrong, but the anime suggests that it's maybe more than 1 in a million, considering he goes 2 for 2 on incarnations. Silly number jokes aside, the fact that Megumi just happened to be a suitable vessel for Sukuna is a tad on the convenient side. The only other person capable of holding Sukuna was someone purpose-bred for the role in Itadori Yuji. When the event hinges on these borderline impossible criteria, and they're bypassed because the plot needs them to, without being properly built toward, the payoff ultimately feels cheap and undeserved. Following on the second issue, there's also a number of relatively flagrant issues that arise because of this moment that impact the overall quality of Jujutsu Kaisen's narrative, generally around the impacts that it has on several of the characters. A commonly mentioned point is the role of Sumiki in the narrative, especially as she relates to Megumi. Sumiki is generally considered to be a relatively weak character, seeing as JJK has almost no time to spend on it, despite the massive presence that she provides within Megumi's personal story. In fact, we only ever see Sumiki briefly mentioned in flashback. For the possession event, Sumiki has effectively been erased from the narrative as a character, and instead entirely comes as a plot device, as Yorozu takes her place. Whilst this doesn't necessarily detract from Megumi, it does prevent the reader from achieving another level of depth through any interaction between the two. The lack of interaction between characters who probably should have interacted is all over JJK. Even with several significant teacher-student pairs, Yuki and Todo, Kusakabe and Miwa, Gojo and Nobara, we rarely, if ever, saw interaction. One of JJK's main themes is passing on the torch to the next generation. With that context, this can only be read as a negative. Kurisu Hana is also a victim of this narrative decision. Given the shared history between Sukuna and the Angel, as well as the fact that the Angel's technique is somewhat of an anti-Sukuna weapon, Hana has to be swiftly removed from Sukuna's way. The method that Gege chose for this was interesting, continuing the classic Shonen Jump trope of "I can't write women at all." Hana is characterized as a stereotypical young girl so in love that she's absolutely blind and stupid to everything going on around her. Hana gets her arm ripped off after mistaking Sukuna for Megumi, or I suppose more specifically, after falling for his extremely obvious ploy. Because it's obviously not Sukuna. He's not even trying to act like Megumi. He still has the marks on his body. Hana, the Angel is literally shouting at you, it isn't too late. For fuck! Megumi himself is another victim of this event, as Gege chose to achieve Megumi's moment of vulnerability and weakness by using the revelation of Yorozu being Sumiki all along. In a classic lovers pair, Megumi is also required to face character assassination via being extremely stupid, just like Hana. I say this because the moment hinged on Megumi not considering that Sumiki could have been the incarnated type of player. You know, one of the only two possibilities, one of two, for those in the culling games. See, the big problem with this is that throughout the manga, Megumi has been characterized as the antithesis of this sort of thing. We've spent so much time with Megumi's shrewd narration, his strong, introspective and critical thinking skills. I'd never have even considered that he would have missed something so blatantly obvious. That'd be because he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have missed this. But Gege needed him to. There is a school of thought that suggests that this slip-up was simply because it was Megumi's sister, and her life was at risk, and he just cares so gosh darn much. To that, I would like to politely point out that basically every time we see Megumi, he is in a life or death situation, and his critical thinking skills are working just fine. But hey, if you don't believe me, or the Kyoto Goodwill arc, or the Detention Center arc, or the first arc of the series, or the Shibuya arc, then maybe you'll believe the Culling Games arc, in which Megami's fight with Reggie Star is entirely constructed of bluffs within bluffs, sleight of hand, and on the understanding that Jujutsu sorcerers are ultimately like con artists. A theme continued till the end of the manga, by the way. How about that other time that Megami's sister was in danger, and her life was on the line, and he was still able to make competent and rational decisions in his evaluation of the situation? The other big issue with this is how it affected Megami going forward, in that it ultimately made him a rather stagnant character. After this, we get a couple of chapters of fighting against Sukuna, then Gege keeps Sukuna and Megami separate from the main cast, other than Gojo, for another 20 chapters or so, by which point there's so much fighting going on that there's not really any chance for character work specifically concerning the relationship between these characters. In short, the concept of Sukuna staying in Megami's body poses really interesting questions for his relationship with Yuji, but this basically goes untouched until it is time for it to be resolved. It might not be the worst thing, but Megami definitely suffers from being sidelined for such a long time after this event. And as someone whose favourite character was Megami, it was very disappointing for him to basically disappear from the story. Hopefully, the issues that I have with this event should be pretty obvious by now. I know I'm not alone in it, and I really do feel this way about the series at large. That said, I still think Gege did a good job overall with JJK. As we look toward their next series, I hope that we see more narrative progress to string the big events neatly together, and I imagine many others feel the same. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, and feel free to let me know your thoughts. Until next time.